For God's sake, hold on. I can't lose anyone else." Old Ilarion, a tattered cloak covering his weary bones, pleaded with the heavens as the icy wind howled through the cracks of the ruined castle. His two small grandsons, the boys, pale and trembling with fever, clung to him, their tiny bodies shivering beneath the ragged blanket. One's dry cough echoed, a macabre sound in the silence of the medieval night, while the other cried in weak whispers. He had promised himself he would protect them, even if it meant facing death in every shadow of that forgotten place. But with each passing day, hope dwindled, and hunger and cold were more relentless enemies than any army. With a last gasp of despair, Ilarion rose, the dying moonlight revealing an unusual crack in the wall. He didn't know it, but what he was about to uncover there, in the ancient darkness, was a secret that would not only save his family from certain death, but would unravel a forgotten legacy, capable of rewriting the very history of the kingdom. The dying moonlight, a silver thread creeping through the wall's fissures, danced upon the unusual crack Ilarion had just noticed. It wasn't merely an imperfection in the ancient stone, but an almost perfect line, a deliberate cut that suggested more than the mere wear of time. A spark of curiosity, long dormant beneath the weight of despair, ignited in his weary chest. With a sigh that turned to vapor in the frigid air, the old man dragged himself to the wall, his wrinkled, trembling fingers fumbling over the cold surface. He pressed lightly on the stone around the fissure. To his surprise, there was a slight give, an almost imperceptible movement, as if the wall breathed. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, narrowed, trying to discern what lay behind. With renewed effort, Ilarion pushed harder, and a soft creak, muffled by the wind's howl outside, echoed. The crack widened slightly, revealing a dark slit, and through it a glimpse of faded, heavy and dusty fabric. A tapestry, an ancient hidden tapestry. Ilarion's heart quickened, a faint drumming in his chest. Hope, that stubborn flame he thought had been extinguished, flickered again. Carefully, he slipped his fingers into the slit and pulled. The fabric was incredibly heavy, imbued with centuries of dust and dampness, but it yielded, revealing a narrow opening, barely enough for a man to pass through. The air from within was stagnant, smelling of damp earth and a distant past. His eyes turned to the corner where his grandsons rested, their small forms huddled under the blanket, the elder's weak cough piercing the silence. The image of their pale faces, fever consuming their energy, gave him the courage he needed. There was no time for fear or hesitation. He had promised to protect them, and that promise was the only force driving him. Taking a deep breath, Ilarion pressed his lips together and squeezed through the opening, feeling the cold stones scratch his cloak and skin. The darkness within the passage was absolute, denser than the night outside. The sound of the wind howling in the castle was muffled, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. Each step was uncertain, his feet fumbling on the uneven ground, his hands brushing against the rough, cold stone walls. The smell of mold and something older, almost sacred, filled his lungs. The passage sloped gently downwards, winding into the depths of the earth. Ilarion felt the weight of centuries upon him, but the image of his grandsons, the promise made to his late wife, was a beacon in his mind. He didn't know what he would find, but the certainty that it was something hidden, untouched, fueled his determination. This was the chance, perhaps the only one, to change the fate of his small family. After what seemed an eternity, the passage widened. A faint, almost imperceptible light filtered from somewhere ahead. Old Ilarion took a few more steps and found himself in a small antechamber dominated by a massive, heavy and ornate stone slab that sealed an entrance. It wasn't just a door, but a portal to something grand, a secret guarded for ages. The crypt, the massive stone slab, imposing and adorned with time-worn carvings, seemed to seal not just an entrance, but the very breath of hope itself. Ilarion extended a trembling hand, his fingers brushing the cold, rough surface. Forgotten symbols, perhaps crests of a long-extinct royal lineage, were etched into the stone, almost erased by dust and dampness. A shiver ran down his spine, not of fear, but of a profound reverence before the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, tried to decipher the designs, but time had been cruel. The faint light from the passage behind him barely reached the slab, leaving most of the antechamber in dense shadows. Ilarion felt the weight of centuries, the silent history that stone held. But the greater weight was that of responsibility, the echo of his grandson's coughs in his mind, the promise of a future he desperately tried to build for them. With a groan of effort, old Ilarion pushed the slab. His weary muscles protested, and the stone didn't even budge. He tried again, bracing his shoulder, pushing with all the strength his old, hungry bones could muster. Nothing. The slab remained motionless, an insurmountable guardian. A heavy sigh escaped his lips, and for an instant, despair threatened to swallow him again. Would this be the end of his journey? Would hope, so newly kindled, be extinguished like this, before a stone barrier? The image of his grandson's pale faces, their feverish eyes, and the fragility of their bodies pulsed in his mind. "No, I cannot give up now," he whispered to himself, his voice hoarse. The promise to his wife, the oath to protect those boys, was stronger than any stone slab. He was no longer the young soldier, but the resilience forged in ancient battles still burned in his spirit. Ilarion stepped back, taking a deep breath, and began to feel along the walls around the slab. If there was a way to open it, it wouldn't be by brute force. His wrinkled fingers explored every crack, every indentation in the stone, searching for levers, for hidden mechanisms, for any clue the ancient builders might have left. The stone was cold and damp, and the smell of earth and mold intensified. Then his fingers found something different. Not a lever, but a small, almost imperceptible depression, disguised among the carvings of one of the crests. It was a round hole, the size of a thumb, and beside it a series of smaller symbols, precisely engraved. Ilarion frowned, trying to decipher the meaning. They looked like runes, or perhaps letters from a very ancient alphabet, indicating a sequence or a pattern. Carefully, he inserted his thumb into the depression. A soft click, almost inaudible, echoed in the silence of the crypt. Ilarion's heart leaped. He looked at the slab, but nothing happened. Frustrated, he withdrew his thumb and tried pressing the symbols in sequence, following what seemed to be a logical order. First one, then another, with the precision of a man who had disarmed traps in times of war. As he pressed the third symbol, a deep, grinding creak erupted from within the wall, making the very floor tremble slightly beneath Ilarion's feet. The slab, with a slow, heavy movement, began to slide away, scraping the stone floor with a guttural sound that echoed through the antechamber. It revealed an even deeper darkness, an abyss of time and secrets. Stifled air, with a sweet, earthy, almost metallic aroma, escaped the opening, as if time had been sealed there for centuries, trapping the past within its core. Ilarion watched, awestruck, as the slab moved aside, revealing a passage to the heart of the crypt. The faint light from outside could now penetrate a little further, dancing on the dust suspended in the air and revealing a glimpse of something shimmering within, a dull golden glow that promised more than mere ruins. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumming, a mix of reverent awe and overwhelming hope that flooded every fiber of his being. He had succeeded. The portal was open, and with it, perhaps, the chance for a new dawn for his family. With his heart pounding erratically, Ilarion hesitated for a brief moment at the crypt's entrance, the stifled, sweet, earthy air enveloping him. The darkness within was almost palpable, but the dull golden glow he had glimpsed was an irresistible invitation. Taking a deep breath, the old man took the first step into the unknown, feeling the cold dampness of the stone beneath his feet and the scent of centuries of silence filling his lungs. The faint light from the passage, now that the slab was open, managed to penetrate a little deeper, slowly revealing the contours of the place. It wasn't a vast chamber, but a solemn space, lined with polished stone, where dust danced in golden beams. In the center, on raised platforms, lay stone sarcophagi, some open, others sealed, and upon them what appeared to be human figures, or what remained of them. Ilarion approached with reverence, his steps echoing softly in the sepulchral silence. His eyes, already accustomed to the gloom, widened. There they lay on stone beds, the skeletons of ancient kings and queens, adorned with darkened metal crowns and jewels that even in their antiquity still shimmered with a subtle glow. The gold and precious stones, once just a glimpse, now revealed themselves in all their silent glory, rings on bony fingers, necklaces upon the dust, brooches adorning disintegrated cloaks. It was a wealth he had never dreamed of seeing, a fortune that could feed an entire city. A stubborn tear traced its way down Ilarion's wrinkled face. It wasn't just the sight of material wealth that moved him, but the weight of history, the legacy of lives that had ruled and dreamed, now reduced to dust and bone. He thought of his grandsons, their fragile, hungry bodies, and the promise of a better life shimmered brighter than any jewel. This was the answer to his prayers, the redemption he sought. With trembling hands, Ilarion knelt near one of the closest sarcophagi. His fingers brushed a gold crown, heavy and intricately worked, but his attention was quickly diverted by something more subtle, something scattered among the remains and treasures, ancient parchments, yellowed by time, some rolled, others open and fragile. With the utmost care, he picked up one of the parchments. The vellum was thin and brittle, and the faded ink was barely visible in the dim light. Ilarion frowned, his weary eyes struggling to decipher the symbols and letters. He was no scholar, but as a former soldier, he had learned to read maps and reports, and a deep intuition told him these were not mere records of possessions. They were family crests, genealogies, and on one of the best-preserved parchments, a detailed drawing. It was a map, an ancient map, with markings of mountains and rivers, and a bright, almost imperceptible point indicated by a star. Beside it, words in elegant calligraphy that Ilarion managed to decipher with effort: Moon Crystal Mine, a legendary gem mine, long considered a myth. The widower's treasure was not just the gold and jewels that lay there, but the key to a new life, redemption for his family, and the restoration of a lost legacy. The weight of the map in his hands was lighter than gold, but infinitely more valuable. It was not just material wealth, but the promise of a future, the chance to give his grandsons not just food and shelter, but purpose, a place in the world. Ilarion felt tears stream freely now, warm on his cold face. He had found not just a treasure, but hope. The ruin, which was once a tomb of despair, had transformed into a cradle of hope, a prosperous future waiting to be unveiled. He needed to go back to the boys, to share this new light that had emerged in the darkness. Ilarion, with the map of the legendary Moon Crystal Mine trembling in his wrinkled hands, felt a warmth invade his chest, dispelling the cold of the crypt and months of despair. The tears, once of relief and gratitude, were now of fierce determination. He couldn't lose a second. His precious grandsons were out there, wasting away. He held the key to their salvation. With an agility he hadn't felt in years, the old man moved. His eyes swept over the sarcophagi, no longer with reverence, but with the practicality of a man on a mission. He couldn't take everything, but a few smaller, Portable pieces could be the difference between life and death. Carefully, he picked up a small gold brooch and a ring with a dull ruby. They were light, but valuable. He tucked them into the inner pocket of his cloak, feeling the weight of hope. Turning, Ilarion hurried through the narrow passage. The path seemed shorter, lit by the flame in his heart. Each step was propelled by the image of his grandson's pale faces. The stifled air of the crypt gave way to the castle's chill. The cold didn't feel as biting. He felt the warmth of a promise fulfilled. As he squeezed through the crack in the wall, back into the ruined chamber, the grey gloom of dawn already held sway. His eyes sought the corner where the boys rested. There they were, huddled, their bodies trembling slightly under the ragged blanket. The elder's weak cough echoed, but it seemed less violent. The younger Gabriel snored softly, a sound that brought a lump to Ilarion's throat. They were alive. With a sigh of relief, the old man crawled to them, kneeling beside Arthur the elder, who slowly opened his eyes, his lips cracked, and his forehead feverish. Ilarion reached out and touched the boy's forehead, still warm, but perhaps a little less so than before. "Grandpa," Arthur whispered, his voice almost inaudible. Ilarion smiled, a smile that had not graced his weary face in a long time. It was trembling, full of tears and overwhelming joy. "Yes, my little one, Grandpa is here." He took his grandson's cold little hand and squeezed it gently. "I found something, my son. Something that will save us. It will bring us warmth, food, and a future." Arthur's eyes, clouded by fever, tried to focus on his grandfather. He didn't understand the words, but the energy in Ilarion's voice, the light in his eyes, was something he hadn't seen in a long time. It was a promise. Ilarion stroked the boy's hair, kissed his forehead. "Rest, my warrior. Grandpa will take care of everything. Soon we will have warm food and a safe place, I promise." He felt the brooch and the ring in his pocket, the cold touch of the metal, confirmation of the discovery. The first task was clear: leave the castle and trade the jewels for supplies. With the map secure, hope was the driving force. He looked at his sleeping grandsons, and a new determination hardened his gaze. The path would be difficult, but he was no longer alone in his despair. He had a purpose, a treasure, and above all, his boys. The ruin was no longer an end, but the beginning of a journey towards redemption and a prosperous future. Ilarion felt the weight of the brooch and ring in his pocket, not as a burden, but as a talisman of hope. The grey dawn barely penetrated the chamber's cracks, but in his heart a new sun had risen. The promise he had made to the boys and to himself now had a path. But the path would be arduous. The nearest town, where he could trade the jewels for provisions, was days away, and winter offered no respite. He watched Arthur, who had fallen asleep again, his face still pale, but his breathing a little more regular. Gabriel the younger slept deeply, oblivious to the turn of fate. Ilarion knew he couldn't take them with him in their current condition. The castle, though cold and ruined, offered precarious shelter, but it was the only one they had. Leaving them was agony, but the alternative was certain death for all. With a lump in his throat, the old man rose. He needed to be quick and discreet. No one should know about the crypt nor the treasure. Human greed was an enemy as dangerous as hunger and disease. He took the thickest blanket they possessed and adjusted it over the boys, trying to seal every crack against the biting wind. He placed a piece of dry bread, the last remaining, beside Arthur in case he woke up hungry. It was little, but it was everything. His eyes scanned the chamber, searching for anything that might be useful on the journey. An old leather pouch, empty and dried out, was found in a corner. He tied it to his waist, along with the small knife he always carried, a remnant of his soldiering days. The map, carefully folded, was placed in the same pocket as the jewels, close to his heart. Every movement was calculated, every thought focused on the mission. Before leaving, Ilarion knelt again beside his grandsons. He stroked Arthur's hair, who shivered slightly, and kissed Gabriel's forehead. His eyes welled up, but he blinked, forcing the tears back. "I'll be back, my loves," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Grandpa will return with hope." The image of their faces, their innocence and fragility, was the anchor that would keep him steady. He headed to the secret passage, closing the slab carefully, ensuring there was no sign of his discovery. The crypt's secret was his family's safety. The castle's cold enveloped him again, but the flame of hope warmed him from within. He needed to find a way out of the ruins, one that wouldn't attract attention. The castle's main exit was collapsed and exposed to the icy winds. Ilarion opted for a less visible side passage that led to an old courtyard covered in snow and rubble. Each step was an effort, his knees creaking, his body protesting against the cold and exhaustion. He crept along the crumbling walls, using the shadows as allies, until he reached the secondary gate, long since unhinged. The outside world was a desolate white blanket. Snow fell lightly, covering the ground and skeletal trees. The wind howled, biting, but Ilarion didn't feel the cold as before. His eyes swept the landscape, searching for the path. The town was a distant smudge of smoke on the horizon, a beacon of life amidst the desolation. With a last look at the ruined castle, which now sheltered not only his grandsons, but the secret of a future, Ilarion quickened his pace. The journey would be long and dangerous, but he was no longer helpless. He had a purpose, a treasure, and the promise of a new dawn for his boys. With each step, he felt the strength of family, the resilience of the human spirit propelling him forward towards redemption. Hope was his compass, and unwavering love his shield. Hope was his compass, and unwavering love his shield. Ilarion pressed on, each step a battle against the snow that sank beneath his worn boots and the biting wind that seemed to want to tear his soul from him. The icy air burned his lungs with each breath, and his muscles, already weakened by hunger, protested painfully. The town, a distant promise on the horizon, seemed unattainable. His eyes, clouded by exhaustion, fixed on the smudge of smoke, a beacon of life amidst the white desolation. He clutched the brooch and ring in his pocket, the cold touch of the metal a constant reminder of what was at stake, of the future he carried in his wrinkled hands. The image of Arthur and Gabriel's pale faces floated in his mind, more vivid than the icy landscape around him. He felt the boys' fever, heard their weak coughs, and this vision propelled him, an invisible force that kept him from succumbing to overwhelming fatigue. "Hold on, my little ones," he whispered to the wind, his voice hoarse. "Grandpa is coming." Hours dragged on, each longer and colder than the last. The sun, a pale and indifferent disk, began to descend, painting the sky in shades of grey and purple. Ilarion knew he couldn't continue much longer in the approaching darkness. He needed to find some shelter before night swallowed him whole. His eyes swept the landscape, searching for any indentation, any pile of stones that might offer temporary refuge. It was then that, amidst a small grove of skeletal trees, he spotted something unusual. It wasn't a rock nor a snow-covered bush, but a low, misshapen structure, almost camouflaged by the landscape. A hut, or what remained of it, half buried in the snow. A faint, almost imperceptible smoke rose from a makeshift chimney. Ilarion's heart leaped. Someone was there. With the caution of an old soldier, he approached, his steps soft on the fresh snow. The smell of wet wood smoke and something else, an odor of sickness and despair, hung in the air. As he approached the door, which hung crooked on a single hinge, he heard a faint moan. It wasn't a moan of physical pain, but of deep sorrow. Ilarion pushed the door open carefully. The interior of the hut was dark and cramped, lit only by a small fire struggling to stay alight. On the dirt floor, Upon a tangle of dirty rags lay a young woman, pale and thin, her eyes sunken and feverish. In her arms, huddled and trembling, was a baby, its tiny face bluish and its lips cracked. The baby's weak cough was a familiar and painful sound to Ilarion. The woman raised her eyes, startled, but too weak to react. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ilarion felt a tightening in his chest, an echo of the pain he saw in his own grandsons. The scene was a mirror of his own misery, but with an even more desolate touch. There were two lives on the brink of the abyss, with no one to protect them. A fierce conflict erupted in Ilarion's heart. His mission was clear: the town, the jewels, the salvation of Arthur and Gabriel. Every minute lost was a risk to them. But how could he, a man who had sworn to protect the weak, turn his back on this sight of suffering? His wife's promise, the oath of altruism he carried in his spirit, echoed. He was not just a desperate grandfather, but a man of honor. With a heavy sigh, Ilarion knelt. The town could wait for a brief moment. He couldn't leave them. The hope he had found in the crypt was not just for his family, but to be shared, to rekindle the flame in other hearts. This unexpected encounter, this sight of vulnerability, was the turning point. Ilarion knew that the path to his family's redemption also lay through compassion for others. He took the last piece of dry bread from his pocket, the same one he had saved for Arthur, and extended it to the woman, his eyes welling up with a new and profound determination. Ilarion extended the piece of bread, his wrinkled fingers trembling. Lyra, with effort, raised her hand and took the food, her eyes wide with gratitude. She didn't eat it herself. She broke off a piece and brought it to the baby's lips, who, with a weak whimper, tried to suckle. The scene broke the old soldier's heart. It wasn't just hunger, but exhaustion. Ilarion felt urgency. His own grandsons, Arthur and Gabriel, were desperate, but the sight of that mother and child rekindled the flame of his old oath, an unwavering commitment to altruism. Carefully, he approached the fire, adding kindling. The flames licked at the wood, offering warmth. "Are you alone?" Ilarion asked softly. Lyra nodded, her eyes welling up. "My husband. He's gone," she whispered, "to seek help. He never came back." A tear traced its way down her dirty face. Ilarion felt a chill. Winter was cruel. "And the baby?" he asked. "He's very sick." Lyra shook her head, tears streaming. "He has a fever and an incessant cough." Ilarion knelt again. He felt the baby's forehead, which burned with fever, just like Arthur's. They needed warmth, food, and medicine. "My name is Ilarion," he said, trying to convey trust. "I will help you. Trust me." Lyra looked at him, a spark of hope in her dull eyes. "My name is Lyra," she replied, her voice a little stronger. "And this is my son, Finn." The old soldier took off his ragged blanket and spread it over Lyra and Finn, adding warmth. He knew time was crucial. The town seemed even further away, but the decision was made. He couldn't abandon Lyra and Finn. His mission had expanded. The hope he carried was not just for his grandsons, but for all who suffered. He remembered his promise to his wife of altruism. It was in these moments that a man's true character was tested. Ilarion searched the hut, looking for something useful. He found a clay pot with dried herbs and an almost empty water skin. He sat near the fire, watching Lyra, who now seemed calmer. The baby nestled in her arms. The bread, though dry, seemed to have given her strength. "I have a plan," Ilarion said firmly. "I will go to the town. There I will trade something for food and medicine, but I cannot take you now. It is dangerous for both of you." Lyra looked at him with apprehension, her eyes pleading. "But what if you don't come back?" Ilarion held her gaze, his expression serious and unwavering. "I will return. I have my own grandsons waiting for me in a nearby castle. They are sick, just like Finn. I would not abandon them, and I will not abandon you." The mention of his grandsons brought new and profound determination. He swore. He briefly explained that he had something valuable to trade, without revealing the treasure. "I will try to return before tomorrow nightfall," he promised. "Keep the fire lit and eat the rest of the bread." Lyra nodded, a silent tear. He needed to be quick. The weight of the brooch and ring in his pocket seemed to increase, now burdened not only by the hope for his grandsons, but also by the lives of Lyra and Finn. He stood up, adjusted his cloak, and with a last look at the small family, stepped out of the hut, back into the snow and biting wind, his compass of hope now pointing towards a shared future. Ilarion stood up, adjusted his cloak, and with a last look at the small family, stepped out of the hut, back into the snow and biting wind, his compass of hope now pointing towards a shared future. The cold enveloped him with an intensity that seemed to want to tear his skin from him, but the image of Lyra and little Finn, as fragile as his own grandsons, ignited an even stronger flame in his chest. It was no longer just for Arthur and Gabriel that he fought, but for these new lives that fate had placed in his path. Every step in the deep snow was a reminder of the urgency. His knees creaked, his dry cough scratched his throat, and exhaustion threatened to fell him at every instant. But Ilarion did not yield. He was a soldier, and this was the most important battle of his life. The brooch and ring in his pocket weighed, not as a burden, but as the promise of life. The town, once a distant smudge, began to take shape on the horizon. As he approached, the muffled sound of voices and the smell of hearth smoke became clearer. Ilarion felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The town was a place of hope, but also of dangers. He needed to be cautious. No one could know about the crypt, nor the extent of his treasure. With his experienced eyes, he observed the movement of the streets, searching for a discreet place, away from curious glances and greed. His gaze fell upon a small shop, set back from the main square, with a faded sign that read, "Antiquities and Remedies." It seemed a quiet place, where an old man could sell something without attracting much attention. With his heart pounding, Ilarion pushed open the creaking wooden door. The interior was dark and dusty, filled with strange objects and glass vials. A middle-aged man, with spectacles perched on his nose and a weary air, looked up from an ancient book. "Can I help you, old man?" the shopkeeper asked, his voice hoarse, but not unfriendly. Ilarion took the gold brooch from his pocket, the piece glinting faintly in the gloom. "I need to sell this," he said, his voice firm, but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "I need food and medicine for sick children." The shopkeeper took the brooch, his eyes widening slightly as he examined the detailed work and the subtle gleam of the ancient gold. He turned it over in his hands, assessing its weight and quality. Ilarion watched every movement, every expression, his body tense. The man cleared his throat. "It's a fine piece, old man. Where did you get it?" "It's a family heirloom," Ilarion replied promptly, a necessary lie. "Passed down from generation to generation." The shopkeeper nodded slowly, his eyes scrutinizing Ilarion for a moment, before turning his gaze back to the brooch. He seemed to hesitate, then shook his head. "I can't offer much. Times are hard, but enough for what you need, perhaps." He named a price, a sum that to Ilarion was a fortune. A deep sigh escaped Ilarion's lips, a mix of relief and gratitude. It was enough, more than enough. "I accept," he said, extending his hand. With the money in his hands, Ilarion felt a wave of renewed hope. He bought fresh bread, dried meat, cheese, and most importantly, medicinal herbs for fever and coughs, and a warm wool blanket. Each item was a step towards salvation. his heart filled with unwavering determination. He would return, he would save them. The journey back would be equally arduous, but now he carried not only hope, but the certainty of provision. With the money in his hands, Ilarion felt a wave of renewed hope. He bought fresh bread, dried meat, cheese, and, most importantly, medicinal herbs for fever and coughs, and a warm wool blanket. Each item was a step towards salvation. His heart filled with unwavering determination. He would return. He would save them. The journey back would be equally arduous, but now he carried not only hope, but the certainty of provision. With his arms laden with packages, Ilarion left the shop, the weight of responsibility and gratitude mingling within him. The sun was already leaning westward, and the cold intensified, but he barely felt it. The image of the pale faces of Arthur, Gabriel, Lyra, and Finn was a fire that warmed him from within. He hurried through the town streets, avoiding curious glances, until he reached the snow-covered trail that led back to the desolation. Each step was a monumental effort. The fresh bread and dried meat, once light, now seemed to weigh tons. The wool blanket, soft and warm, was a luxury he could barely carry, but he knew it was essential. The snow, which had fallen earlier, was now deeper, and the wind howled, mocking his fragility. Ilarion stumbled a few times, almost falling, but each time, the sight of Lyra's pleading eyes and Finn's weak cough spurred him to rise again. He could not fail. Hours dragged on, and the darkness of night began to swallow the landscape. The cold was excruciating, penetrating his worn clothes and weary bones. His lips were cracked and his throat dry, but Lyra and Finn's hut was his first destination, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. He forced himself to press on, one step after another, his muscles burning, his breath short. Finally, when the moon was high and the world seemed a realm of shadows and ice, Ilarion spotted the faint smoke from the chimney. A sigh of relief escaped his lips, turning to vapor in the icy air. He approached the hut, his heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from an overwhelming emotion. He pushed the door open carefully, and the smell of smoke and the faint warmth of the fire enveloped him. Lyra was sitting near the fire, baby Finn nestled in her arms. Her eyes, once dull, widened as she saw Ilarion. A spark of hope, almost extinguished before, ignited in them. Ilarion, exhausted, dropped the packages to the floor, the sound of bread and dried meat falling softly. He knelt, his body trembling, and extended his hand to Lyra, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "I'm back," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the journey. "I brought what I promised." Lyra, with tears in her eyes, reached out and touched Ilarion's arm, a gesture of gratitude worth more than all the gold in the crypt. She said nothing, just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Ilarion took the fresh bread and a piece of dried meat, offering them to her. Lyra took the food with trembling hands and for the first time in days ate with a ravenous appetite, breaking off a piece for Finn, who, with a whimper, began to chew. Next, Ilarion unfolded the warm wool blanket and placed it over Lyra and Finn, feeling the warmth spread. He took out the medicinal herbs, instructing Lyra on how to prepare them. Finn's cough seemed a little less violent, and his lips, once bluish, began to regain a healthier color. The hut, once a place of despair, now radiated a warmth of hope. Ilarion watched Lyra and Finn, a lump in his throat. The satisfaction of having fulfilled his promise was immense. But the journey was not yet over. His own grandsons, Arthur and Gabriel, still awaited him at the castle, and with each passing minute, the cold and sickness threatened them. He needed to rest, but not for long. The flame of hope in his chest burned stronger than ever, propelling him to the next stage of his mission. The hut, once a place of despair, now radiated a warmth of hope. Ilarion watched Lyra and Finn, a lump in his throat. The satisfaction of having fulfilled his promise was immense, but the journey was not yet over. His own grandsons, Arthur and Gabriel, still awaited him at the castle, and with each passing minute, the cold and sickness threatened them. He needed to rest, but not for long. The flame of hope in his chest burned stronger than ever, propelling him to the next stage of his mission. Sitting near the fire, Ilarion felt his body protest. Every muscle ached, and exhaustion pulled him towards a deep sleep. However, his eyes remained fixed on Lyra, who now cradled Finn, her face a little less pale, a fragile calm replacing her previous despair. The baby, warmed by the blanket and with a slightly fuller stomach, breathed with less difficulty. The cough, though still present, was not as incessant. Ilarion saw a silent tear trace its way down Lyra's face, a tear of relief and gratitude that he deeply understood. "You brought life back to us, Ilarion," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, without looking away from her son. The gesture of touching his arm again, with a delicacy that contrasted with the roughness of her hands, expressed more than words ever could. Ilarion nodded, a tired but warm smile curving his lips. "It's what we do for each other, Lyra. It's what life teaches us." He felt a warmth spread in his chest, not just from the fire, but from the human connection forming there, amidst the desolation. "But I cannot stay long. My grandsons, Arthur and Gabriel, are alone in the castle. They also need me, and these medicines." Lyra raised her eyes to him, the spark of hope in her gaze now brighter, but mixed with a new concern. "Alone? In the castle? But it's so cold there. And they are sick, you said." Her voice was a soft lament, an echo of the pain Ilarion felt. "Yes, they are, and I promised I would return for them," Ilarion replied, his voice firm, though the mention of the boys tightened his heart. "I need to take them to a safe place where they can recover. Perhaps here." He looked around the small hut, imagining how he would accommodate 4 people in such a cramped space, but the idea of having everyone together under the same roof was a balm to his soul. Lyra, with an effort, sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on his. "If you bring them here, Ilarion, I will help them. Finn and I are better now. I can keep the fire lit, prepare the herbs. There isn't much, but what we have, we will share." The offer, coming from someone who just hours before was on the brink of death, touched Ilarion deeply. It was the essence of altruism, the seed of hope blossoming in the most barren soil. Ilarion felt his eyes well up, but this time, the tears were of gratitude and a renewed faith in human kindness. That would be a great help, Lyra. A great help. He knew that the path to his family's redemption and the restoration of their legacy was not just about the treasure, but about the web of human connections he was weaving, one thread of hope at a time. He needed to rest, if only for a few hours, to gather strength for the next stage. Lyra's promise and the sight of Finn sleeping more peacefully were the strength he needed. He leaned back against the dirt wall, closing his eyes, but his mind was already planning every detail of Arthur and Gabriel's rescue. Dawn would bring a new challenge, but now he was not alone. Ilarion leaned back against the dirt wall, closing his eyes, but his mind was already planning every detail of Arthur and Gabriel's rescue. Dawn would bring a new challenge, but now he was not alone. The warmth of the fire, though faint, was a balm for his aching body. He heard Finn's soft breathing and Lyra's faint murmur as she watched over her son with silent devotion. The image of his grandsons, alone in the castle, with sickness eroding their small strengths, was a torment that prevented deep sleep. Every fiber of his being yearned to be with them, to wrap them in the warm blanket that now warmed Finn, imagining the same warmth for his own boys. With the first pale ray of light peeking through the crack in the door, Ilarion rose, his muscles protesting with every movement. Lyra raised her eyes, an expression of concern on her face, her thin lips slightly curved. "Are you leaving already?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Ilarion nodded, his gaze serious and determined. "I must go, Lyra. Every minute is precious for them." He handed her the remaining bread and dried meat, a gesture of trust. "Keep the fire lit. I will be back before nightfall with Arthur and Gabriel." Lyra held his hand, her eyes welling up with deep emotion, nodding slowly. "Go with God, Ilarion. We will be waiting and praying for you." That simple gesture, the faith expressed in her gaze, was a new impetus for the old soldier, a silent promise of support. The journey back to the castle seemed even longer and more arduous. Snow had fallen again during the night, covering the trail with a fresh and treacherous layer. The wind, now more biting, howled like a lament, seeming to whisper warnings in his ear. Ilarion felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also the lightness of the hope that Lyra had rekindled. He visualized Arthur's face, Gabriel's smile, and this image propelled him step by step against winter's relentless fury. Finally, the castle ruins emerged in the icy mist, dark and imposing, like a sleeping giant. Ilarion quickened his pace, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. As he entered the chamber where he had left the boys, a chill ran down his spine. The silence was heavy, deeper than usual, almost suffocating. The small fire he had lit before leaving was almost extinguished. Only dying embers, flickering faintly. His eyes swept the floor, searching for the small huddled bodies with desperate urgency. There they were, Arthur and Gabriel, lying side by side, pale and motionless under the few ragged blankets. Arthur trembled uncontrollably, his skin cold to the touch, and his breathing was a weak, irregular wheeze, almost inaudible. Gabriel, even smaller, had bluish lips and half-closed eyes, an almost inaudible whimper escaping his throat. Fever consumed them, and the cough, once a familiar sound, was now a silent and deadly threat. Despair gripped Ilarion's heart with brutal, overwhelming force. They were on the brink of the abyss, closer to darkness than he had ever imagined, and the sight broke his soul. "Arthur! Gabriel!" Ilarion called out. His voice choked with panic, a hoarse and desperate sound. He threw himself beside them, his wrinkled hands trembling as he touched the boys' hot foreheads. The herbs, the bread, the blanket. Everything seemed so insufficient before that sight of fragility. A wave of guilt washed over him, bitter and suffocating. Had he taken too long? Had his decision to help Lyra and Finn cost the lives of his own grandsons? Tears streamed down his weathered face, mixing with the cold sweat of effort and anguish. He needed to act. There was no time for regrets, only for action. With a strength he didn't know he still possessed, born of love and despair, Ilarion took the new wool blanket and wrapped Arthur, then Gabriel, with the utmost care, nestling them. The boys were light, fragile as birds fallen from their nest. He lifted them one in each arm, feeling the fever radiate from their small bodies, a heat that burned his own soul. The task of carrying them back to Lyra's hut seemed impossible, a burden too heavy for his weary shoulders and advanced age. But the promise to Lyra, the vision of a shared future, the flame of hope he carried in his chest, all of it propelled him. He could not fail, not now, not when salvation was so close. His eyes, once filled with panic, fixed on the castle exit, a fierce and unwavering determination replacing despair. He would take them to the hut, to the warmth, to Lyra's help. This was his final battle, the climax of his journey of redemption and love. With the small bodies of Arthur and Gabriel nestled in his arms, Ilarion emerged from the castle ruins, the biting wind lashing his aged face. Each step in the deep snow was a battle, his muscles screaming in protest. But the sight of his grandsons' pale faces, The fever radiating from them was a fire that burned stronger than the cold. He held them with a delicacy that belied his strength, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the faint smoke from Lyra's hut represented the only hope. The journey back was a blur of pain and determination. Ilarion stumbled, knelt in the snow, but never let go of the boys. The image of Lyra, with Finn in her arms offering help, echoed in his mind, a mantra of resilience. He remembered the warmth of the fire, the smell of herbs, and this propelled him. "Hold on tight, my boys," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "We're almost there." Finally, the faint light of the hut became visible, a beacon in the icy darkness. Ilarion, with the last remnant of energy, pushed open the door. The warmth enveloped him, and Lyra, who had been watching by the fire, looked up, her face illuminated by a mix of relief and dread at seeing the boys so fragile. She rose quickly, her eyes fixed on Ilarion's, her own baby, Finn, now more alert, watching from her lap. "They are very ill," Ilarion whispered, his voice choked, carefully handing Arthur to Lyra's outstretched arms. She took him with an instinctive tenderness, feeling the fever emanating from the small body. Ilarion then placed Gabriel on the floor, near the fire, and unfolded the wool blanket, wrapping them. Lyra, without hesitation, began to prepare the medicinal herbs, her movements quick and precise, guided by experience and urgency. Ilarion, exhausted, sat beside Gabriel, his wrinkled hands touching the boy's hot forehead. Lyra, as Arthur trembled in her arms, applied the herbs with a warm compress. The sweet scent of the plants filled the hut. Mingling with the aroma of smoke and hope, Ilarion watched Lyra, gratitude filling his chest. The guilt that had tormented him for taking too long to return to his grandsons began to dissipate, replaced by the certainty that he had made the right choice. The human connection, Lyra's altruism, was the true cure. The following hours were spent in vigil. Lyra and Ilarion took turns, applying compresses, coaxing the boys to drink the herbal tea, whispering words of comfort. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Arthur and Gabriel's fever began to subside. The cough, once a tearing sound, became softer. Gabriel's bluish lips regained a rosier color, and Arthur, though still weak, stopped trembling. Finn, warm and fed, slept peacefully in Lyra's lap, a symbol of the life being restored. With dawn, a profound calm settled in the hut. Arthur and Gabriel slept a more peaceful sleep, their breathing more regular. Ilarion watched his grandsons, then Lyra, who smiled faintly at him, a tear of relief tracing its way down her face. "They will be all right, Ilarion," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion but full of contained joy. Ilarion nodded, a lump in his throat. The sight of his grandsons, safe and beginning to recover, alongside Lyra and Finn, was the resolution his heart had so yearned for. The small hut, once a temporary refuge, had become a cradle of hope, a home for this new, improbable family. The immediate conflicts, sickness, hunger, cold, had been faced and, with mutual help, overcome. Ilarion felt an overwhelming relief. The crypt's treasure, with its promise of wealth and legacy, was still there, but the true wealth, he realized, was the life he had helped preserve, the human connection he had forged. The future was still uncertain, but now, with his grandson safe and a new ally by his side, Ilarion knew they would find their way to a new life, together. The future was still uncertain, but now, with his grandson safe and a new ally by his side, Ilarion knew they would find their way to a new life, together. The following morning brought not only light, but a sense of peace that had long been absent from Ilarion's heart. The sun, still weak, peeked through the hut's cracks, painting the dirt floor with golden hues. Arthur and Gabriel slept deeply, their faces, once pale and contorted by fever, now relaxed and with a healthier color. Their breathing was soft and regular, a balm to the old soldier's soul. Lyra, though exhausted, watched them with a faint smile, Finn nestled in her arms, also in a peaceful sleep. Ilarion felt a warmth spread in his chest, more potent than that of the softly crackling fire. That warmth was not just relief, but the certainty that life, in its purest and most resilient form, had triumphed. He knelt beside his grandsons, his wrinkled hands caressing Arthur and Gabriel's hair. A solitary tear traced its way down his face, but this time it was a tear of pure gratitude. "They are well, Lyra," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion without looking away from the boys. Lyra nodded, her tear-filled eyes reflecting the same joy. "Thanks to you, Ilarion. You brought more than food and medicine. You brought hope." She reached out, touching his shoulder in a gesture of deep connection. "This hut, once so lonely, now has life, a new family." Ilarion raised his eyes to her, a genuine smile curving his tired lips. "It wasn't just me, Lyra. It was your kindness, your strength, your willingness to share the little you had. The true wealth was not in the crypt's gold, but in this moment, in this union." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the children's sleeping faces. "But the treasure, it will give us the means to build a future, not just for us, but to help others who suffer as we have suffered." He told Lyra about the documents, about the royal lineage, and the map of the gem mine. Lyra listened with wide eyes, disbelief mixed with growing admiration. "A gem mine, a royal legacy," she whispered, almost breathless. This could change everything." "It can," Ilarion confirmed, his voice firm. "But it's not just about wealth. It's about restoring what was lost, not just our lands, but dignity, justice. We will use these resources to rebuild, to create a place where no one has to go through what we have." He looked at Lyra, his eyes conveying a silent promise. "With your help, Lyra, together." Lyra hugged Finn in her arms, a look of determination replacing the weariness on her face. "Yes, Ilarion, together." Her voice was an echo of his, filled with new strength. "We can start here, in this hut, make it a true home, a refuge, and then, when the children are strong, when winter yields, we will go in search of that legacy." Ilarion felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The journey had been long and arduous, but every step, every sacrifice had led to this moment. The small hut, once a symbol of despair, now radiated the promise of a new beginning. It wasn't just about gold and jewels, but about the family he had found, the hope he had rekindled, and the future they would build together, brick by brick, with the strength of human connection and the brilliance of altruism. The widower's treasure had indeed revealed itself as the key to a new life, a redemption that transcended any material wealth, a legacy of love and overcoming that would flourish amidst the ruins of the past. The promise of a new beginning hung in the air of the small hut, as palpable as the scent of herbs and smoke that still lingered. Ilarion watched his grandsons, Arthur and Gabriel, who now played gently with Finn, Lyra's baby, near the fire. The boys' faces, once marked by sickness and despair, now showed a faint rosiness and shy smiles. Lyra, sitting on a makeshift bench, sewed a small patch onto Arthur's clothing, her movements calm and filled with a new serenity. It was a scene of domestic peace, a picture of resilience Ilarion never imagined witnessing again. "They are recovering quickly," Lyra commented, raising her eyes to Ilarion, a gleam of satisfaction in her gaze. "The fever is completely gone, and Finn, he has never been so strong." Ilarion nodded, a genuine and relaxed smile curving his lips. "The kindness of a pure heart is the best medicine, Lyra. You gave us more than shelter and care. You gave us a family." He approached, sitting beside her. "We need to think about the next steps. Winter is still harsh, but we cannot stay here forever. The castle, the treasure, it awaits us." Lyra stopped sewing, her eyes fixed on the fire's flame. The castle is a cold and frightening place, Ilarion, but I know it's where the future begins. How will we do it? It's too much for one man alone. Ilarion took her hand, a gesture of trust. It won't be one man alone. It will be us, you, me, and the hope we carry. First, we need supplies. With the gold from the crypt, we can buy what we need in the nearest village. Food, blankets, perhaps even some tools to make the castle more habitable, at least a part of it. His eyes filled with a vision. It won't be a palace overnight, but we can transform it into a safe haven, a place where children can grow without fear. The boys, oblivious to the serious conversation, giggled softly as Arthur tried to make Finn hold a twig. That sound, so simple and pure, was the sweetest melody Ilarion had heard in years. Lyra watched her children, a lump in her throat. And the lands, Ilarion, your lands, and the royal legacy? One step at a time, Lyra. First, the safety and well-being of the children, then justice, the documents from the crypt. They will give us the right to claim what is rightfully ours, but not just for us, for all who have been dispossessed, for those who have no voice. Ilarion felt the ancient flame of justice, which propelled him in his soldiering days, rekindle in his chest. We will use the wealth to restore, to build a community where altruism and human connection are the pillars. The map of the gem mine will be our foundation, but the true edifice will be built with the strength of our hands and the kindness of our hearts. Lyra smiled, a smile that lit up the hut. So, tomorrow, you will go to the village? Yes, Ilarion confirmed, his voice firm. And I will return with everything we can carry. But I will not return to the castle alone. I will take some of the treasure to the village, and then, when the weather permits, I will take the children there so they can see what we are building. A home. The idea of returning to the castle, not as a desperate refuge, but as a life project, filled Ilarion with renewed energy. He looked at Lyra, at the boys, and felt that the widower's treasure was, indeed, the promise of a prosperous future, not just in material wealth, but in love, family, and purpose. The journey was just beginning, but now he was not alone. The hut, once a temporary shelter, had become the starting point of a new era. A silent testament that, even in the deepest ruins, hope can flourish and life can always be rebuilt.